So welcome everyone to the Equivariant Systems workshop. My name's Rob Mahony. I'm co-organising with Stefan Weiss here and Jake Veld. And we really appreciate you guys coming along and being part of the age of equivariance, as I'm going to talk about in a moment. So what we're trying to do in this workshop is a few things. So one of them is, like any sort of scientific workshop, to provide a forum for people working in this area to get together, to communicate, to talk to each other, and to share ideas and importances. And it's really important for a field like equivariance, where there's a number of different communities coming together in the same sort of field, and we're using different language sometimes, especially between the machine learning and the dynamical systems. And so we need to be able to actually talk to each other. So these workshops are really important for that sort of stuff. And as part of that, I'd say, please come and talk to us during the breaks and at any time. We're really happy to talk. And I'll put up the slide of all the different panelists. So we've got a whole stack of panelists working in the area, and we want to talk with all of those. So the other thing, a second thing that we're really wanting to do is that this concept of equivariance is something that has been around in dynamical systems for 25 years. I'll talk a little bit about the history of it in a moment. It's a little bit newer in the machine learning. It's been around for about 10 years. 2016, I think, was sort of the first, the group invariance in machine learning paper. And these fields come together in robotics in particular around embedded systems and agents, right? So where you're using machine learning to control moving systems and dynamical systems to control and understand moving systems. So it's really our field of robotics where these two concepts of equivariance are coming together. And so it's our opportunity as a community to unify a little bit this language and these terms and draw together different researchers and have exchange across that boundary. So that's something that we feel really strongly. I don't think there's any other community, scientific community, where you've got the same sort of confluence of different people working but using effectively similar mathematics to do what they're doing. All right, and the final thing that we're really wanting to emphasize is we want to normalize the mathematical language and lower the entry barrier to people coming into this field. So one of the challenges in geometric control and in using these tools, effectively these are the tools of symmetry and geometry that we're using, right? And these tools are not taught in undergraduate degrees. So if you actually think about your undergraduate degree, you know, typically you learn linear algebra, you learn ODEs, you learn a whole bunch of regression and stochastics and statistical methods, Fourier transforms and everything. And perhaps if you're in mathematics, you might learn some geometry, differential geometry in fourth year of a degree, and maybe a Lie group course as an extended course or something. So it's a difficult field, not because the maths is more difficult than other fields. If I actually, really think back, stochastic systems is it's a hard topic to learn, but you get a lot of stochastics at university, right, if you're in engineering, but you don't get a lot of geometry. And so as a professional working in the field, you suddenly run into these concepts of manifolds and differentials on manifolds and symmetries and Lie groups and all of this. And the language is very off-putting and it's hard. So we're aware of that, and part of what we're trying to do is lower that barrier and introduce some of these materials. And so in particular, we've got tutorial talks in today. All right, who remembers the age of Aquarius? Has anybody here seen hair? I have. Oh, yeah, there we are. There's three of us, three of the over 50s or something. So I was just amused when I wrote down the age of equivariance, and I thought this is very similar to the age of Aquarius and such like. But it's not true that equivariance is going to revolutionise the robotics and the science that we do. It's not a revolution. That's for sure. But what I think is established is that these tools are truly making a difference. So there are a set of problems where I would argue that we have truly shown state-of-the-art algorithms, especially in my field, in filtering. I would argue that there's a set of problems where actually the state-of-the-art filter algorithms are using equivariance. And I think in machine learning, there's real results coming out as well. And so this is a toolbox that is going to become a toolbox that is useful in the future. And so I think investing in the field is really worthwhile. And I thought maybe it's worth thinking about symmetry and invariance and just looking at history, right? So this concept of invariance and principles of invariance is really old, right? So Euclid's axioms, if you think about them, are exactly that, right? They're principles of invariance for geometry, that, you know, two lines in a straight line don't meet and such like. And Galileo's principle of relativity is really a statement about invariance. So the modern understanding of Galileo's principle of invariance is the existence of the Galilean transformation group that preserves space-time. That's what it is. And the same is true in relativity. You know, the principle of relativity, Einstein's principle of relativity, the modern statement of that is that there's a group action on space that preserves space-time. The language of that is much more modern. So, you know, we forget, because we live in our little bubble of 2025, you forget how recent the modern language of differential geometry is, right? So you actually, if you want to write down what these Lie groups, the modern way we write them down, how they're expressed and how they're written down, it's the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s that this stuff was actually worked out. So if you start looking at homogeneous spaces and reductive Lie algebras and all of this sort of stuff, it was Nemitsu, and the topology was written down in the 50s, 60s and 70s. So this is not an age-old language that we're working with, although, I mean, that doesn't seem old to me, but it is getting a little bit older these days. So in the engineering community, at least, invariance and equivariance was looked at in the 1980s in the dynamical systems field. Jesse Grizzle has a thesis on equivariant systems for systems and control. And out of that group of work grew an understanding of how to actually language of invariance. That didn't go so far, but what did happen was the classical mechanics work. So this sort of then melded with Marsden and Abraham's work, where they were really studying classical mechanics on manifolds of, you know, of moving bodies and stuff. And that sort of melded through Caltech and a couple of other places into the field of geometric control. And so there's this field of geometric control that some of you will be aware of, where the system that you're considering has physical invariances. So it's a Lagrangian system on some sort of, you know, state space like SO3, its attitude or its pose. And there's a whole set of work there which looks for structure. So these are the bundle structures that they work with, where they have the fibers associated with the group actions of the invariance, and they have the base space, which is essentially the configuration space that you can move your arms and legs around in and then move in the bundle. That block of work is not really what this workshop is based on, right? So there's another sort of group of work that came out, the equivariance, where I was sort of there at the start of this, where it was much more prosaic. So that was born actually out of the dawn of the UAVs, and we were trying to build filters for aerial vehicles. And the existing theory of Kalman filtering was all implemented in Euler angles and in Rn type things. And it just simply wasn't very robust. And, you know, in the 2000, 2005, the IMUs were really, really crappy, right? 8-bit, and they were noisy, and they had huge biases, and the biases went everywhere, and the Kalman filters just couldn't do it. And so that was when we started using the geometric structure of SO3 and SE3 to actually get just really simple filters that were robust enough to actually fly the vehicles, right? And so what that kicked off was a different perspective, right? So these guys were looking at invariance from a very classical mechanics perspective. So they're looking at invariance as I have, a mechanical system, it has a Lagrangian. That Lagrangian is, I have a group action. The Lagrangian is invariant under the group action. I can do a reduction back into a left trivialization of the space, the part that's invariant, and I get this decomposition of the space. And it was all about classical mechanics. Where we were here was we've got robots that we can't make fly, and hey, if we formulate it on this Lie group structure, it's way more robust and it works, right? And so it was really prosaic. We were very, so the first 5 or 10 years of this work, basically we're publishing almost application papers, right? Every paper, if you go back and look at that, there's actually a robot doing something at the end of the paper, right? Whereas you go and read the classical mechanics paper and there's no robots. So that created this field, which is obviously the one that myself and Stefan work in quite extensively. Interestingly enough, I think separately then in 2016 or so, there's the Cohen and Welling, the ICML paper, which sort of looked at studying machine learning and realizing that there's this sort of invariance properties in machine learning that you can use to minimize complexity of a neural network, and you can use to effectively encode physical priors about space and get better generalization, better stability of the underlying results, and decrease complexity of the networks. And so this is a really powerful idea here. And they share the word equivariance, right? So that at least they share that. Whether or not they share more than that, I think our argument is that I think there's a lot more parallels between the two fields. That's what we're trying to bring out today. So I'm using, as we were talking about, professors can talk forever. I've used up most of my time. I've still got a couple of slides to go, so I'll go through the rest. I mean, I just said there's a bunch of problems where I would argue that we are state of the art. So in dynamical systems and observers, these yellow ones, I would argue that the state of the art algorithms out there are now based on these equivariant systems. There's a bunch of problems down here where I think we're still working on them, but they're starting to, we're working out what the right symmetries are, and we're starting to use things like LiDAR, 4D LiDAR, all sorts of bits and pieces that are starting to come in. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. I won't spend a lot of time. All right, so what are we doing today? So we're really keen to give you a bit of a primer. So Jake's going to talk about symmetry from a sort of a first principles point of view, and a decent talk. And so please do ask questions during the talk. We'll transition straight into Stefan's. This is a long session and we apologize for that. So he'll talk about state estimation and observers, and in particular the EQF, how to understand that. We'll go to coffee. So we'll all walk across and get the coffee and come back. I'll talk a little bit about equivariant theory and control. This is quite a new subject, using it for control, right? We started here because that was where the problems were. And then we'll have a panel discussion in the morning, right? And so we're really interested to get the input from our panelists to get a bit more perspective for somebody who's not actually so much working in that area. There's a lunch break here, and then we'll come back so that we can reconvene for the lightning talks. And as Jake said, if you've got lightning talks, you have to have your slides in the shared document before the lightning talks. We're not going to be plugging in and plugging out computers, right? So we'll come back here so we're all together, and then we'll walk across to the posters. So by lunchtime, before lunch, hopefully we'll know where the posters are. And when we walk across to lunch, we might walk over to where the posters are. People can put up their posters, leave them there. Then we'll come back to the lightning talks, go across, do the posters. In the afternoon, then we'll start with Mahony, to do an intro into the learning, and then we'll have a panel on that. And so that's how we're trying to cover things off. We have a wonderful group of people who've come along, and I wanted to put everybody's faces up here. I'll show you the organisers again in a moment, but part of what we're about is creating a community. So all of these people will be along at some stage today. 8 o'clock's obviously too early for some of them, but just go up and talk to people, right? Just have a conversation. That's what this workshop's about, right? Don't feel shy at all, no wrong questions and all of that. If you've got logistical questions, we're basically in the front row, Mahony, Stefan, Jake and myself. Just ask us. Make sure you upload the slides. We will be having some best paper awards. One of them's a fan favourite best paper award. So if you've got a phone, just before we go across to the posters at the end of the spotlight session, we'll have a QR code. Take that and you get to vote for your 3 favourite posters, and we get to vote for the 3 best posters. So that's the way we think about it. The only other logistics to say is if you need to go to the loo or anything like that, just make your way out. The loos are down near the stairs. So you basically go down past the stairs towards the escalators. Just keep going that way until they're on your left. Any other logistics? No, I think, Jake, I'll hand over to you. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming.